Hello everyone, today I am going to show you how to sew the body of the owl. So we are going to place our owl part with our face on it on top of the other body piece, lining up the edges. We want to put our wrong sides together so we have a nice border around the edge. This is different than what we normally do because at the end we're going to want to have a border around the whole outside. Now that I've lined them up as best I can, I'm going to place pins to keep them together. I suggest primarily placing the pins in the felt because it's a little bit stronger than the fleece is. The fleece is just a little bit stretchier. So I'm gonna place a couple in the wings, one in the belly, and then one through the eyes. So when I'm pinning, I am pinning both of the pieces together. So now my two body parts can't come apart. What you should do is use a color of thread that matches your wings or some other large piece of fabric, just because you want the threads to blend in as much as possible. If it's not perfect, that's okay. Now I'm gonna line up the stitching on my wing with this line in the middle of the presser foot right by where my nail is, because that's gonna help me line up. Even though it's not a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, it's gonna make it look a little bit nicer. I'm gonna sew forward, then I'm going to backstitch, and sew all the way around the border of the owl. Go very, very slowly because there's lots of curves and corners. Now that I'm getting close to the end of the wing, I'm gonna sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the rest of the owl. Going very slowly to make sure that I'm following the lines to make it as even as possible. Because I'm getting close to the ears, I'm gonna pivot to make sure that I get some nice curves. And now that I'm coming up on my wing again, I'm gonna try to follow that same line right here. Now I'm going to backstitch. And take it out of the machine. You'll notice that I did not sew all the way around. I still have a hole in the bottom because this is where we're going to stuff the owl. Now that my owl is sewn all the way through, you'll notice that there's a hole at the bottom. And this is where we're gonna stuff the owl. So I'm gonna take a little bit of stuffing and just stuff it as best I can. It helps if you use smaller pieces of stuffing because then it's easier to get it up into the corners. So you're gonna shove it all the way up into the ears, behind the eyes. And this is your stuffed owl. I started by stuffing the upper corners and then putting stuffing around the edges of the owl and then stuffing the middle. Once you sew this shut, you can kind of squeeze it around to make sure that the stuffing is as soft or as evenly distributed as you want it. You can make this as firm or as soft as you want. It's up to you. The more stuffing you have, the more firm it's going to be, and the less stuffing you have, the squishier it's going to be. Next, what we're gonna do is sew along the bottom here to seal everything in. So before we do that, we wanna make sure that all of the fuzzes are out of the way. So as you can see, there's a good 1/2 inch to inch between the edge of the fabric and the stuffing, and this is to allow us to stick it in the machine. I find that it's easier to sew this project with the wrong side up, or the back of the owl up, so that way you can follow this seam line that we made previously, but it's up to you, whatever is easier for you. It really does not matter. And line up the edge of the presser foot with the edge of the project. This is probably one of the hardest parts of the project, just because you have to work with the stuffing. I'm gonna start a little bit before my stitching line ends. As you can see, I'm lining up the line that's in the middle of the presser foot with that stitching line that I previously had. And I'm gonna sew forward, nice and slowly. And I'm gonna back stitch. And I'm gonna sew forward again until I meet that other stitching line. Then I'm gonna back stitch all the way across to make sure that it's nice and strong. And then sew all the way forward. And then back stitch one last time. Sew forward. And that's it. Now I can go ahead and take it out of the machine. And now this is my finished owl. I can now squeeze around the stuffing to make sure that it's evenly distributed. And you can see my stitching line at the bottom. I wasn't paying attention, so I accidentally folded over one of my wings. That's okay, I wouldn't take off points for that. That's one of the reasons why it may be easier for some of you to sew with your project face up, meaning with your eyes and everything on the top part. I thought it was easier to follow the stitching line on the back, but again, that's up to you. You'll notice that you see several back stitches. Mine were not super straight. That's totally fine, as long as it seals your edge. Because there's stuffing in there, you wanna make sure you back stitch across the entire bottom portion of the owl. Otherwise, it could unravel and the stitching could come out. This is your stuffed owl. Make sure you put your name on your instruction sheet because the rubric is on the back, and I will have you just place the owl on top of your instruction sheet when you're done. Thank you very much for watching.